I'm Hal Humphreys,
And I'm John Nardizzi.
and we're doing this live today. The Sound of Pursuit live. We'll see how this goes. It's going to be, I'm going to guess, a little bit on the entertaining side. And when I say entertaining, I mean we may screw some things up along the way, but bear with us. So John and I had a little bit of conversation about this um, earlier over the weekend, the latter part of last week, about the things we wanted to talk about today. And the first thing that comes to my mind that I think is interesting and useful for private investigators to think about. The Idaho murder case is all in the news right now. And I saw an article in Express UK last week. Let's see if I can get this to show up here. Express UK. So this is the news article, express.co.uk. Idaho murder suspect hires private investigator to mount strong defense. And one of the things they talk about in here is the idea of hiring a blood spatter expert. John, on your first hearing, on your first reading of this, I mean, when someone says, I'm going to hire a blood spatter expert, what do you think?
Red alarm, red alert, red flags. Not that any expert hired by the prosecution is going to be using junk science, but this is one that has been flagged by many, many defense attorneys and judges. And, the fact that I love the title.
And John has frozen up on us. So I'm going to go real quick over here to junk science from the Marshall Project. So if you want to learn more about junk science, and there are some serious problems with blood spatter analysis, but it's not the only area of junk science. There's also just this world of problems with junk science. And if you want to learn more about those things, I can strongly recommend that you check out the Marshall Project. And if you do that, you're likely to see, and there's John Nardizzi back with us again. I was just,
did we lose?
we lost connection there just for a second. So I was talking about junk science and the myriad ways that junk science presents itself. This is out of the Marshall Project. And if you're a private investigator, I strongly suggest you check out some of these resources we're going to mention today. The Marshall Project is a fantastic resource for attorneys, investigators, private investigators, those kind of things. But also, ProPublica is a really good source of information. The Intercept is one of my favorites. What are some others that you think of, John, for just news articles and things to kind of educate yourself on current happenings and stuff like that?
I take a look at Northwestern's, the Center for Wrongful Convictions, oftentimes is excellent. And more generally, I like EPIC.org, the privacy organization, in terms of broader things related to private investigations in our industry.
Right.
So those two are always great sites to check out.
So this first website I have pulled up is the Marshall Project. They've got a collection of links in here that they've curated on junk science. And the first one that I want to come up to is hang on. All right. Yeah, this guy right here. He teaches police witching to find corpses. Experts are alarmed. So, John, what do you call witching? What are there any other terms you can think of?
I think you and I were talking about this is like the old-fashioned dowsing for water. Somebody's walking around with metal rods, supposedly.
Yeah, it's like in the South here, they call them divining rods. These two little metal rods that will come together when you're over a source of water, in theory. I mean, I have not read this article all the way through, but it's shocking to me that someone is using divining rods to assist in investigations. It falls.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it seem like using a psychic, possibly?
It's That's right along the same line. I mean, the claim is that these rods are able to pick up high levels of compounds consistent with human decomposition, but there's absolutely zero studies done on this. I mean, you could pick up, I mean, some of the comments on the article have talked about you're picking up decomposing leaves or decomposing organic matter from animals. Uh, there's just nothing to it. There's no testing. There's never been a controlled study showing that this can be done. But he's training a large number of people to do this, and in some courts, it looks like they're actually introducing the evidence, which is shocking, really.
I mean, I would say I'm shocked, but the longer I do this work, the fewer things actually shock me that end up getting into court because, all right, so the first one we talked about was the defense team for the accused in the Idaho murders. So his family has hired a private investigator who is a blood spatter expert. Here's the thing. If the prosecution's going to bring it in, then why not have the defense bring someone in? I get that. Like that notion doesn't offend me. What offends me is we're calling something science and giving it credibility when there is none.
Yeah. Yeah. And if both sides are using junk science, it's not as if that makes it right that all of a sudden you have some better outcome. Both sides are relying on things that don't work. How does this happen over and over in certain jurisdictions?
And you had mentioned before we started bite mark analysis. That's another one that's been debunked. Talk to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, bite mark evidence is very interesting area. You know, it was used for many years. This idea that you could look at a crime scene and bite marks on a body, and then in the absence of any real full, say, a complete set of tooth markings on somebody's body, you could somehow discern that second tooth relates to this suspect's bite mark, which you would get a separate sample from that suspect and compare them. And oftentimes you were comparing one or two teeth marks on a body to some suspect's entire dental record. It was used for many years, and we had a case here. The Gary Cifazari case in Massachusetts was one of the first bite mark cases, and Gary Cifazari remained in prison for decades until an attorney with the New England Innocence Project scanned the record, literally looking for bite mark cases that she could challenge. All the credit to her for doing that. She picked it up, and within about 6 months, we had that conviction overturned. It was overturned for a number of reasons. One was that in full credit to the bite mark expert who testified in that trial in the 80s, he submitted an affidavit saying he was wrong on some of his conclusions, which was really important. Many experts will not do that, as you know, Hal. They'll fight, even years later, that their faulty affidavit is, standing the test of time. But this expert retracted a lot of that, and we also had a DNA hit on a police informant, which also contradicted a lot of the evidence at the scene, and we were able to overturn that conviction. So bite mark evidence, any investigator out there that comes across any case where you see that kind of evidence, you really want to take a close look at that.
Yeah, and I think everybody is well on page that hair follicle analysis has been pretty well thoroughly debunked. There are so many areas of quote unquote science that have just been proven to be not reliable. I'm thinking specifically of one specific type of expertise. And I want to run through a list that I've heard over the years of like people that claim an expertise in different things. Deception detection.
Yeah.
Body language, micro expressions, voice stress analysis. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Bite marks. There was a case, I think it was in Texas, where they used a dog's smelling a man to show that he was the guy that did the thing.
Yeah.
all manner of, these experts in different fields. The blood spatter thing intrigues me because, John, what would you think would be required to be an expert witness?
Yeah, that's one of the things that when you read some of the literature on blood stain or blood spatter analysis, you can become an expert in this. So imagine this: you're somehow working in a related field or maybe an unrelated field, and you take a 40-hour course, 40 hours. And so that's basically 1 week. You go Monday through Friday, 8 hours with a little break for lunch. Hal, I'm trying to think of how many things I've done for 40 hours and whether I would be qualified as an expert. That is the baseline to become qualified under this gentleman's courses as a blood stain or blood spatter expert.
It's astonishing. I talked
It
to
really is.
I talked to an expert witness one time. One of the jobs that I have as a private investigator, sometimes working with my attorney clients on defense cases, is I'm charged with vetting the experts. Like if they've got an expert witness they want to bring in, they've never worked with them before, they'll say, "How, go check this guy out, see if it's legit." I looked at one. He was an expert in cell tower triangulation.
Yeah, that's a common one.
He was also an expert in cell phone forensics, computer forensics, voice stress analysis, blood spatter analysis. Like there were like 15 or 16 different expertise that he felt competent to testify on as an expert. And that's terrifying.
Yeah, it is. And related to what you just said about backgrounding an expert, I'm sure you've come across this. It's always interesting when attorneys ask you to background an expert, and then you can bring up, as most investigators do, we background everybody. We background people on employment cases. We background regular witnesses. It's amazing how often they don't background an expert in the normal way. In other words, you're looking for evidence of bias, evidence of convictions, evidence of fraud. You can background an expert just like you would do any other witness. Is that something that you guys do in a lot of these cases?
Absolutely. And not only that, not only bias, but we're looking for, all right, so for an expert witness, what you're looking for is an independent, third-party, non-biased opinion about a thing, about a specific thing. So I do expert witness testimony as a valuation expert. I'm a certified fraud examiner. I'm a 30-year veteran of the real estate valuation game. I'm certified general real estate appraiser. I have the credentials to testify as an expert witness on matters of value when it comes to real estate, right? If somebody were to vet me as a witness, they would find all of those things and be able to say, oh yeah, he's definitely got the qualifications. But the other thing they would find is I have worked for the State Department of Commerce and Insurance as an expert witness, basically for the prosecution. And I have worked for individuals and insurance companies as an expert witness for the defense.
Yeah.
That balance of testimony makes one more credible as an expert witness. So if you're looking for expert witnesses, one of the first things I look for, have they ever testified for both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're always going to be, I do a lot of sexual harassment investigations, and related to that, we're always encouraged to take cases on both sides.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be attacked as simply testifying for one side and sort of slanted toward that one side. And if you're going to be an expert or a witness, you want to defend against that.
And a lot of times when when you're taking an expert witness under voir dire, the attorney is in a court of law, the jury has gone out of the room and they're asking them questions to draw out the truth met one witness. One of the things they often ask is, have you ever testified for the defense? And on the prosecution side, it's almost always no.
Right. That's true.
But that never gets in front of the jury. I guess it can. I just think it's interesting that true experts, in my opinion, are capable of talking about the subject matter in which they're an expert in an independent, non-biased way, and not trying to make a case for their side or the other side.
Absolutely. Exactly right. And related to, we started this discussion about blood spatter and blood stain. I recently have come across a case that we're just getting into, and you'll love this. It involves an expert in paint spatter. And the person, my understanding is that the expert worked at a hardware store.
I thought you were going to say the expert worked at a paintball range.
It's not much better. The expert worked in a hardware store and was very familiar with mixing paint and was allowed to testify as an expert in the way that paint splattered on a wall, which was relevant somehow to the case. We haven't fully examined how he was qualified to do that. It doesn't look like he ever ran any experiments. It just looked like he was sort of like all of us, anecdotal evidence saying, well, 9 times out of 10 or 7 times out of 10, white paint looks like this when it gets thrown up against a wall. It's amazing. I mean, it's something that we're looking at in a case.
Yeah, it's terrifying. So I want to get back to blood spatter, and I want to go through a couple of these articles that we've got on blood spatter. If you're interested in the topic of blood spatter analysis, I strongly recommend that you go to ProPublica. They have a series of articles specifically on blood spatter called Blood Will Tell. Really good, in-depth reporting about blood spatter analysis and the junk science behind it. John, have you ever dealt with just a straight-up blood spatter expert?
We have not seen much of it in Massachusetts. I'm sure that it has been in some cases. I've heard of it, but I haven't directly run across it in any of the wrongful convictions or criminal cases yet.
Okay.
But
let's talk about some other types of junk science. And again, the topic today started off with the Idaho murder case, and they hired a private investigator. That private investigator is expected to testify as an expert in blood spatter analysis, which leads us to the topic of junk science. I do want to take just a second, and it's now mid-roll time. So we're going to go to the hashtag for the week, which is junk science. If you want to talk about this on Twitter, if you're posting on our YouTube page, just use the hashtag junk science. If you want to find us on Twitter, you can find Pursuit Mag at Pursuit Mag on Twitter. My Twitter handle is at FindPI. John, what is yours?
Author PI.
At Author PI on Twitter, you can find John Nardizzi. We're all there. We're all available. If you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor. Click down right underneath this video. Subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us out a great deal. If you're listening to the podcast, you can find us on YouTube with the YouTube handle at PI Education. And go check it out. Check out the video. Check out, you get to see John's beautiful face and my hairy face on the screen doing this podcast live in real time.
What a team we make, Hal. we cover all the bases. All the bases.
And then finally, if you are in need of continuing education, you can use the discount code SCIENCE101 to get 15% off of any course you'd like to take from PI Education. Just when you get ready to check out, key in the phrase Science 101. It is not case sensitive. So get yourself a discount there at PI Education. Okay, coming back here to the main screen, you're listening to The Sound of Pursuit, coming to you live from Studio B at the PI Education World Headquarters right here in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Hal Humphreys, and this is
John Nardizzi.
And John, tell us where you're coming to us live from.
I'm coming live from Boston, Massachusetts.
Boston, Massachusetts. So,
we've
covered some of the websites about junk science. Of course, the ProPublica site is a great resource. Again, Blood Will Tell is a series of articles. This one, written by my pal Pam Koloff, talks about a blood spatter analysis in Joe Bryant's murder case. It was not accurate or scientifically supported. And interestingly enough, John, for this story, Pam Koloff took the 40-hour course to become a blood spatter expert.
Didn't realize she's doing fantastic work in this area. So, Yeah, so she's not. So she can now testify in these different jurisdictions.
She jokingly sent me a text right after getting through the class. I'm now a blood spatter expert. Like, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's
Well,
exactly what we need.
yeah, and have you seen the article that talks about the police witching expert or dowsing,
Yeah,
as we
hang on,
call it?
here we go. Here we go. Witching, here it is. The Marshall
Yeah.
Project.
There's another invention, and we just want to flag this for any investigators working out there. You might see in the future a reference to something called a quantum oscillator. This was described in the article. And the teaching is as follows: everything in the universe vibrates at a specific frequency. Gold has a gold frequency, silver has a silver frequency, and your DNA has your frequency. So if you take a fingernail clipping from a person, you can then find the missing person. So this was all part of the class, and the gentleman teaching this was asked, uh, "You're saying that if we get a fingernail clipping from this missing girl, and we use this quantum oscillator, we could find her?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "What's the price? We want to buy one right now." And he said, "I'm just kind of assisting law enforcement when needed. That they're not for sale right now." So I don't know, Hal. If you if you had a quantum oscillator that could find missing children, do you think you might want to have that available for sale to various police departments and
I mean,
investigators working on these cases?
I,
I mean,
it's an episode
again,
of Doctor Who.
yeah, yeah. It's
All right. So here's the
it's
thing.
tough to,
If a quantum oscillator were able to, off of a single fingernail clipping, find a human being, find my phone, like you use it, if it were able to work like that, number one, it would be so funded by every government agency around. Number two, it'd be free and available to everyone in the world. And number four, nobody wants that.
yep. And again, where is the data? The hard. I mean, this is something that could very easily be tested. You could have peer-reviewed research. You could have tests that you run where you actually pick clippings from people's fingernails and then find them, but you don't see it. You just have these claims by uh, so-called experts. And again, this gentleman is considered an expert in this area, and this is something that could be coming down the turnpike. I mean, sad to say, but
There's
there
a
will
lady.
be.
There's a lady who sells a course on deception detection, and she was identified as being one of the top 50 human lie detectors based on this test that the Ekman group ran.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, Paul
and
Ekman.
yeah, and here's the thing: I have no problem with people taking training from Paul Ekman. I have done. I have no problem
Yeah,
with
me too.
people. I don't mind people reading about deception detection and body language. I think there's useful material in there. But at the end of the day, the Ekman study, where she was identified as one of the top 50 lie detectors in the world, was not a scientific study.
Right.
And one of the actual scientists who reviewed it said, he said, look, if you took 15,000 pennies and you flipped each one of them 10 times to find heads or tails, probably 5 to 10 of those would land on tails more often than heads. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
they're better at landing on tails than the rest of the coins. It's just that's how chance works.
Exactly. And the other thing too is when you read some of the lie detection studies, or you actually read deep into Paul Ekman's writings, a lot of these guys will stress that just because you have certain indicators of, say, surprise or disgust, and these are some of the what he claims are the universal signs that appear across cultures on people's faces and with in the face of certain stimuli. Um, it doesn't mean that they're lying. It's simply an indicator that this might be a sensitive area for this person. This is why the reaction is surprise or disgust or anger. It doesn't mean they're lying. So uh, everybody always wants that sort of final, easy. This is how you can tell somebody's lying. This is it. It's that's not really what the research that has been fruitful is going to tell you. It's just areas of sensitivity.
Here's the thing. If I said I love Kim Green right now, I'm looking up and to the left. Does that mean I'm lying about that? I mean, it's insane. It's
Yeah,
absolutely insane. Here's the thing. Studying body language is crazy useful for a private investigator because you can learn when someone is uncomfortable about something. And all in the
exactly.
world that does is tell me I want to ask more questions about that.
That's right. That's right. It's just a cue to keep going and explore and investigate that area. It's not a flat out sign that they're lying about something. And the whole that example that you gave of looking up and to the left, one of the amazing things about that is we all know where that came from, and I hesitate to even give too much lineage to it because it's been debunked. Neurolinguistic programming
Right.
for detectives. Um, so you know that I write and read crime fiction. I'm a big fan, and I read other authors. That example appears over and over, even in some of the most famous authors writing today. They've all read that somewhere, and you always have the hero PI looking at someone's eyes, and it shoots up to the right, and they say, "Oh, the guy's lying." I mean,
Yeah.
it's not the way it works.
Well, I've sat through God, I don't know how many countless jury voir dires, selecting the jury process where they're asking the jurors questions. And some of those have been on capital cases where you get to do individual voir dire. And the number of times I've heard just normal citizens selected to be in the jury pool sit in the box and answer the question, can you tell when someone's lying? Yes, I can. How? When they look up and to the left. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
it's in that
Yeah.
thriller written by Michael Connelly. It's got to be true.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Crime fiction has spread that throughout the populace. Absolutely. You
yeah,
see it everywhere.
yeah, and
Yeah, and
it's
it's gonna take a concerted effort by everybody in this industry to sort of teach people that's really not backed up by anything. And the origins for that for neurolinguistic programming was actually counseling, where you had sort of long-standing relationships between a patient and a psychologist or psychiatrist. And even there, they were never sure that it really worked. But somehow, some enterprising trainer in law enforcement read some of those studies and carried it over into our field, where it's sort of been perpetuated for decades now.
and the funny thing is, it becomes ensconced in law, through precedent. It was accepted as an expert thing in this case, but then when it's used, neurolinguistic programming techniques are used in the example of Nexium. Everybody's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, that guy's a fraud. We knew that all along." But at the end of the day, if it's going to make a prosecution case, they're going to use it if it's going to make the case.
right. Yeah,
Um, it is
yeah.
it is infuriating. And here's the thing: I've gotten marketing materials from so many people that are pushing these junk science things, and I swear to you, every time I get one, I think that person is a charlatan.
yeah, yeah. And again, that goes back to one of our earlier points. I really would encourage every investigator who gets a case where you're going to vet the expert. Don't just look at the expert credentials, which we've already talked about, and verify, did they really take these courses? Go right back to the very beginning. Do they have these degrees? Do they have cases out there, criminal cases, civil cases? And one of the sad comments that I get, Hal, sometimes from attorneys who aren't experienced is they'll say, "Well, this expert is 64 years old. Somebody already would have found this. They already would have been backgrounded." I say, no, that's not how you should be thinking. You need to be the one that's holding yourself and your client up to the very best standard. Do the background. Do it now. You don't really know whether anybody's ever backgrounded this person.
No, and at the end of the day, it's your job to background every person you're going to use, not just take everybody else's word for it. Here's the last bit of junk science I want to talk about. I really have gotten a kick out of reading this, other than the fact that it's terrifying.
Yeah.
This guy has developed this super secret, double top secret method of telling if someone is guilty by reviewing their 911 calls. And he's consulting with police departments around the country. Have you read anything about this, John?
Just a little bit, but you and I have both been a fan of Bone Valley, and there's a little touch of that in some of the officers recollecting. Remember the recorded calls, basically versions of, I guess they were 911 calls, how they're commenting on the demeanor of Leo and how he's just not convincing, not realizing that he's talking off the phone to somebody else in the room, which accounted for, sort of for his angry manner in certain calls. And again, this is insane that you're diagnosing people through a phone call is
And
basically all it is.
and furthermore, okay, by the time now I know that sometimes the stoner calls 911 because they can't find the pizza, but by the time someone's gotten to the point where they've dialed 911, there's a really good chance, if it's a legitimate 911 call, that they are in the very process of experiencing a trauma.
Absolutely.
And how one person reacts to a trauma and how another person reacts to a trauma are almost always going to be different, number one. But if you're not experiencing that trauma, it's really difficult to judge what you would do in that situation.
Right. And it's also different, as we pointed out, it's also difficult to diagnose or figure out who else is there. Some of these 911 calls, as you can imagine, there's other people in the room. There's comments that are directed to other people in a house or in a room during a 911 call. And, to sort of try to figure out somebody's state of mind from that and turn it into a pseudoscience is another dangerous junk science that unfortunately I think we're going to have to combat.
Well, let's do this. We're going to go to the hashtag for the week. If you find this on YouTube and want to comment, use the hashtag junk science. If you're on Twitter and you want to comment, number one, you can find us at Pursuit Mag on Twitter. You can find me at FindPI. And John, say yours one more time.
I am at AuthorPI on Twitter.
AuthorPI. So if you want to join us in any conversation about this on Twitter, feel free to use any of those @ signs, at Pursuit Mag, at FindPI, at AuthorPI, and then hashtag it Junk Science. We'd love to hear what you have to say. That's going to bring us right up next to the end of the podcast. Again, for those of you that need continuing education, you can use the discount code SCIENCE101. It's not case sensitive. When you check out on PI Education, just key that discount code in. That'll get you 15% off of any course you want to take. John, thanks so much for being here again today, and I'm looking forward to many, many more of these.
Yes, sir. This was fun, and we'll definitely have a great topic for next week.
All right, Chief. Hey, and speaking of, what do we want to talk about next week?
Well, we'll have to come up with something. I know we have a whole list of great topics for investigators, so we'll ponder that a little bit.
Okay, and those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel, feel free to leave comments in there on the YouTube channel and let us know what you'd like for us to cover in the next Sound of Pursuit podcast, and then again on Twitter using the hashtag Junk Science. If you want to tell us things you'd like for us to talk about on the Sound of Pursuit on Twitter, please do so. We'd love to hear from you. That is it from the Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys.
I'm John Nardizzi.
And now
have a great week, everybody.
And now a quick shout out to our sponsors.